Hi, folks. Welcome back to Father-Offspring Interviews. This is episode 32. So, first, we have here a confession from the professor regarding last week.
Well, the confession, I was discussing Thomas Aquinas's notion that even God cannot make a triangle with more than 180 degrees, and a large number of very helpful people pointed out that if you have a triangle on a globe, it has way more than 180 degrees. So I have to confess, I really know next to nothing about geometry. Plus, I believe the Earth is flat.
Great. You heard it here first, folks. All right. So, also from last week, we're going to start with a question that we got. So, is allostasis a subpart of homeostasis? It sounds like the difference is that you can be homeostatic, but in a range that isn't optimal. If your dopamine levels equilibrate somewhere that's far below where you would optimally function, are you in a suboptimal homeostasis and therefore not in allostasis?
The totally logical follow-up question, which I think I could paraphrase as, so wait, so what is allostasis? And is it different from homeostasis? Homeostasis, it's been around for about a century, ninth grade biology. Your body is in balance. There's an optimal everything, and homeostatic adjustments are very straightforward. If you are homeostatically challenged because you're cold, your body comes up with an appropriate response, which is you shiver, your muscles generate heat. It's very straightforward. If you're too hot, your homeostatic response is your pores and open up and you sweat all over the place. Sort of the body as a fairly straightforward thermostat. You got a set point. If it goes above it, turn this off. It goes below, turn that on. Very straightforward. And the notion, the term allostasis came in a really visionary guy in the field, Peter Sterling at UPenn, sort of coined the term with the notion that it's just a more modern sense of what homeostasis is about, a more sophisticated one. And it's more sophisticated in at least three ways. First off, the fact that your optimal set point, your homeostatic ideal, can be different at different times, and your body adjusts what the set point is, the desired set point, and thus changes the rules. If this is where you want to be, you need more of whatever to get. If this is where you want to be, you need less of whatever. And what an optimal set point is for estrogen varies depending on where someone is in their menstrual cycle. What the optimal point is for your metabolic rate depends on whether you're hibernating or not. So the first one is set points can change under different circumstances. Second notion is the fancier aspect of allostasis is it could be anticipatory. You can have a physiological shift in anticipation of a challenge that's coming at you. And that's clearly the case if, like, your metabolism suddenly starts changing in September or so, and you put on more weight because you're a ground squirrel and you're going to hibernate soon and you need to, ooh, it doesn't have to be freezing winter yet. So, allostatic anticipation, which sometimes could be really bad news because, ooh, you anticipate I am just about to be physically savaged by some menacing way. And the reality is that you're, in fact, about to be threatened by some psychosocial stressor. And, ooh, in anticipation, you turn a anxiety. Anxiety could be in some ways framed as you have an allostatic response, anticipatory response, when there's not actually a challenge going on. Now, for me, the most subtle feature, the most interesting feature about allostasis is sort of its third notion, which is, for the most part, homeostatic sort of concepts from back when, where you solve a problem very locally. If your blood sugar levels rise, your pancreas has a way of monitoring that. And if they go up, you secrete insulin. And if your glucose levels go down again, you stop secreting insulin. How do you rate? You just thermostats again, glucostats, just very straightforward. And what allostasis incorporates is the notion that actually what your body is doing is far flung multiple layers of things. It's shifting in response to sort of a challenge. Okay, so since I'm in California, you think about water shortages. So, homeostatic solution, there's a shortage of water. Homeostatic solution, you decree that people have to have low flow toilets. That's that's as close to the issue as you could get and very mechanistic. Allostatic, there's a water shortage. So what do you do? One of the things you do is like you decree that there should be low flow toilets. In addition, you ask people to start believing that rock gardens are a whole lot more beautiful than actual living ones that require a ton of water. You get people to rethink why you need to have golf courses in a semi-arid climate. You teach people that, like, for 100 calories of cow meat, you need to have this much water used, but 100 calories of like beans and lentils protein, you use that much. Ooh, let's shift our food habits. You start campaigns to convince people, you let people know who are the most water thrifty out there, and you urge people to mate with them as a result. This is allostasis. So yeah, you do something with the water flow and but societal and a big level like that. So that's much cooler stuff. But you get a problem, which is the more far flung the things you're mobilizing to solve your very local problem, and there's not enough water around, the more likely you are to come up with one of these far flung ones overshoots something else and makes a mess of something, or two of these you come up with are mutually contradictory, and you then get a concept that my old doctoral thesis advisor Bruce McEwen, one of the giants of neuroendocrinology, who's been gone for about 4 years, and I miss him dearly. And he went from being my thesis advisor to 40 years of a father figure. But he came up with the notion of allostatic load. That's simply because you're doing all this far flung stuff, the odds are there's just going to be cumulative wear and tear on the system because you're mobilizing a lot of different things. And this whole concept by now of allostatic load, of there being a mismatch, like, ooh, that's a great adaptation, but there's a mismatch because by adapting at this level, you're also having this effect and things spill. It's just a much more sophisticated view. So the notion there is like wear and tear on the system. You got high blood pressure. You got high blood pressure because every day you're stuck in traffic trying to get to work. Homeostatic solution, give somebody an antihypertensive drug. Allostatic solution, among all the various things, talk to the person. Why do you want to be working for a boss who is so abusive, who reminds you of your abusive grandmother, and thus if you get to work 2 minutes late, that ruins your day? Or like just taking things on a whole bunch of different levels. Why am I unenthused about the allostatic concept as a term? I kind of think homeostasis, just say modern homeostasis, more sophisticated homeostasis. It reminds me a little bit of like that Thoreau quote, Thoreau, who I'm normally very contemptuous of, but like be very on guard about any new venture that requires you to get a new set of clothing. Like if you need a whole new term, in any case, allostasis, very, very interesting concept, could just be high rent homeostasis.
So, next, Daniel from Georgia says, would love to hear your thoughts on the work done at the Kyoto University Primate Research Institute, specifically on the cognitive trade-off hypothesis and research showing that chimps beat humans at short-term memory and even more impressively game theory.
Great. Well, I'm not up on the game theory part, but I assume that's totally fascinating. The memory thing. Okay, let's start off. Let's look at a YouTube clip here. And you take a chimp, and as shown here, you're seeing this chimp, this still, the chimp is sitting there looking at this computer screen, and suddenly up pops a series of numbers, 1 to 9. And the game is you need to put your finger on number one, and the second you press number one, all the other ones disappear and are replaced by boxes. And you now have to see if you could remember, go to number two, then three, four, five. And we will watch here in slow motion this chimp doing precisely that. Okay, so that is great, but that is quarter speed. This is what it actually looked like. Yeah, the chimp is able to do that. And it turns out with a task like that with 9 numbers, chimps have better than 90% accuracy. And you force the grad student in the lab, who presumably is human, to go and do this. You take people who try this, and they have maybe a 5 to 10% success rate. And you suddenly are struck with the fact that implicit in this, chimps have something like photographic memory for that pattern. They're looking at it for a fraction of a second and they remember it correctly more than 90% of the time. And then the even larger implication comes through: chimps are better at this than we are. Chimps have better memories at this than we do. And this is kind of flabbergasting. Now, the researcher who did this, Kyoto University, Tetsuro Matsuzawa, who has spent his career demonstrating this, then in thinking about what is this about, has come up with the cognitive trade-off hypothesis, which on a very simple level basically says you can't have everything. Cognitive trade-off. Us and our chimp cousins, our last common ancestor was 6, 7 million years ago. And what people know from since that split, looking at rate of genetic changes in us becoming us and chimps becoming chimps, the last common ancestor back when had more in common with chimps than they had with us. Big changes in us. So this common ancestor was living in rainforests, living up in trees, arboreal, fancy term for that. And for reasons that all sorts of people have speculated about, the path to us diverging and becoming humans while they became modern chimps was us getting booted out of the rainforest, coming down to the ground, heading out into open savanna, and you're now a very different kind of ape. You've got a big challenge, which is in the process of coming down from the trees, and for a bunch of reasons, your musculature is not that of what a chimp has. A chimp can shred a human. We're not as strong. We're not as fast. We're way out in the open and we're vulnerable to predators. And the way things had to evolve was, if you're going to be a human in this vulnerable position, the way you're going to survive is you got to get atypically good at cooperation, at communication. And before you know it, you've decided to devote a big part of your brain over the next few million years to developing the capacity for language, for long-term play, for symbolic stuff. And the notion of the cognitive trade-off hypothesis is just pretty straightforward. You can't do everything. And what we did over the course of post split, as we became the savanna dwelling, pitiful, vulnerable creature there that we are, is that you gave up the brain space for doing this amazing, you know, working memory with photographic sort of. You gave that up because you're devoting lots of your brain to symbolism and language, and you can't have both. It's a trade-off. So on the surface, that makes a lot of sense in its broadest way. It's been criticized along at least two grounds. First is, so why is it that our last common ancestor and contemporary chimps would have been selected for being able to see 9 numbers in a fraction of a second, remember the sequence? What, they're eating fruits? Like there's a sudden sequence of fruits that ripen, and each one after a second goes moldy and rotten, so you got to quickly remember this. There's like, how did that get selected for? Why is that a more useful thing if you're a tree dwelling ape than if you're a savanna terrestrial ape? So that is the first one. The second criticism is, well, we didn't just throw out the doing this computer game part of our brains in order to get language and symbolism. The human brain is 3 times the size of a chimp brain. uh, you, Maybe you could have had both, or so. The strictest version of this, you got to give up being able to be chimp-like expertise at doing this very rapid photographic memory stuff to be able to do human fancier cognition. there's a few leaky spots in that idea. Nonetheless, it's part of a broader theme that's completely familiar in biological systems, which is over and over, there's a trade off. You can't get everything. There's a trade off, endless examples of trading off quality and quantity. You're a species, like every species out there, you individual, you want to leave as many copies of your genes as possible. And if you are going to evolve the strategy of doing that by having a gazillion babies at once, a quantity approach, you got to give up quality. You're not going to be able to parent them because there's too many of them. They're going to be very short lived because they're not going to have great nutrition growing. They're going to die in enormous numbers. And what do we got here? We got a salmon who like lays, I don't know how many eggs and is long gone by the time kids are going to pre-K. And you got to trade off there. Alternatively, you can take a strategy where you just have a couple of kids at a time, or maybe even one. And what that allows you to do is having slow development of the kid, and they're dependent on you for a long time, which is great because they can learn all sorts of stuff by observing you, but you have to put in a lot of parental. This is what apes are. This is what elephants are. So you can have one strategy or the other. You can have another trade off, kind of a time course one that pops up in a lot of developmental biology and medicine, where you're having a trade off between, I want something now. And the trade off is, I'm going to have to pay a price somewhere down the line. And a whole bunch of genes that we humans carry are associated with, you get an advantage right now when you're a 20-year-old, but the price comes later, is something that we call falling apart in old age. It's this obscure concept called negative pleiotropy, antagonistic pleiotropy. There's a gene, which a subset of us have, which early in life increases your fertility. If you're female with this gene variant, progesterone levels are higher and it does great things for that. And what's the price of that? Having that gene variant greatly increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease 60 years later. Ooh, it's a trade off. And it's turning out the mechanisms by which it's doing great advantageous stuff early on is related to the mechanism by which it increases the allostatic wear and tear on the system so that you pay the price. So there's this constant theme in biological systems of trade-offs. So the extent to which the cognitive trade-off hypothesis applies to chimps here is open to discussion. But nonetheless, the main point about it is chimps are way better at that than we are.
Yeah. And well, so the cognitive trade-off hypothesis is obviously looking at these specific skills, short-term memory versus language skills with our closest relative chimp. But yeah, it kind of alludes to also just this larger question of whether humans have superior cognition in general, which is a big part of us believing in human exceptionalism. Clearly, the fact that chimps run circles around humans in this is a great counterexample. The truth is that our abilities in numerous cognitive domains often pale in comparison to other species. But I think that, the interesting thing about humans is we have a cognitive plasticity that makes us sort of the ultimate generalists, while other species are much more specialized, which is another example of this quantity quality trade off of sorts, where we have a uniquely wide range of cognitive skills with less skill in any particular domain than some other species. Instead of becoming the dominant Olympic gold medalist in like hammer throwing or something, humans decided they were going to train for every single Olympic event and be perfectly happy getting the bronze in most of them. But being that sort of generalist, I think has played a pretty huge role in our success as a species.
Yeah, and I think when you look at, general success out of generalism, yeah, we probably overvalue specialists too much.
All right, so we're going to wrap up on a bit more of the sort of personal level. Shiyang from Taiwan says, you've been asked what advice you would give to your 25-year-old self, and your answer is to be less ambitious. What is the cost of ambition that you think most people need to be concerned about? And what is the cost you would start to more carefully analyze as you age?
Well, we've had versions of this question floating around for many episodes, and I think the fact that I keep postponing it is indicative of some of the complications of this. Okay, so you're young, you work hard, you're smart, you're a good boy, you're in some like major mugwump pats you on the head and says, "Gosh, you're you're you may be the one who finally cracks open the scientific problem. You may be the I would not be surprised if you're the one who does it." And like you listen to them because you admire the hell out of them and they know what they're talking. And you wind up, with this long list of here's the 10 neurological diseases I'm going to cure, and here's the breakthroughs, and here's the people who are going to be helped by it all. And it turns out, like everybody else in your particular stratum of doing science is thinking the same thing, and it's not going to happen in most cases, and you're not going to be the one. And it's going to turn out what you've mostly done is contributed, a couple of pieces to the gears of understanding this whole thing, which, mind you, if you happen to be mature, which I am not, that should seem enough, but still it doesn't quite match the expectations. So that brings the ambition into question. But even if you had been the one to do it, it strikes me by now that maybe the ambition was worth questioning for this very simple reason. And I see this all the time in my college senior advisees who are finishing the stage of life where you basically not only can do anything, you can do everything, because no matter what it is, you just sleep a little bit less and you just like run a little faster between your like organic chemistry class and your modern dance art sculpture exhibition that they're displaying, your political active, and then suddenly you hit this stage where you're now specializing, just to come back to that word from before, specializing. And implicit in specializing is something that is really difficult at that stage, um, to make a choice about, because you basically don't believe you have to, which is you're hitting a point that for everything, every singular, very demanding, ambitious thing you were saying yes to, whether you know it or not, you were implicitly saying no to a whole bunch of other things. And it's a good thing if you knew the trade-off at that point that was implicit in that, or at least recognized that there was going to be a trade-off. And in retrospect, I sure think that's the case. Where's the trade-off that twinges at me at the most at this point? I wasn't around enough for you guys when you were little, and I wasn't around enough for mommy, and mommy was raising you guys way too much on her own while I was doing, and trade-offs. And that was a big no that was implicit in saying yes. So that's one I have very conflicted feelings about.
We got lucky though that we did have pretty much super mom. So
Well, super mom indeed, super spouse, super love of my life. So I think we all lucked out on that one.
yeah. And there you have it for episode 32. So keep submitting questions at the forum found in the Instagram story highlight and bio or the YouTube video description. I'm Offspring Share Sapolsky, and thanks for your continued support of Science and the Beard.